So I'm Tyler Bigler. I'm a staff systems engineer at a large retailer, and I recently made some contributions to the NetBox reports repo for some custom validators. So I just kind of want to showcase this off and maybe give some inspiration and ideas for what you can do with custom validators beyond just the simple ones that are directly built in. So this is the docs page. You can normally set validation rules just right here, plain text kind of stuff like minimum length, max length, but you can write code. If you scroll down, there's some classes you can write. So that's what I'm showcasing here. So I've got this local NetBox instance here. And the first one I'm going to show is, these are all kind of around circuit data and keeping your circuit inventory clean and correct. And so the first use case that I had was we would have a site that was closing down for whatever reason. Engineer would go into NetBox and they would mark the site as retired. Great. Problem is there was a bunch of related objects for that site that were also marked inactive or offline or decommissioned. So I wanted to validate, this is for circuits specifically, but basically we don't want you to be able to retire a site if there are circuits not in the decommissioning status or the deprovisioning status. That workflow should all happen at roughly the same time. Site should be decommissioning. The circuit should also be decommissioning. So that's what this validator does. So if I've got the site here, we can see it's got 2 circuits assigned to it. If I go click onto the circuits real quick, they're both active. Great. So now I'm going to go change the status. It's retired. We skipped through everything else, just straight to retire. That's fine. And now you'll get this warning that says you can't set the status to retired because you've got 2 circuits that aren't in one of these statuses. And I'll show the snippet of code here in a moment. So a couple things, you can tweak the statuses that you want. You could change for the circuits themselves or for the site. Maybe you want a check to happen at the decommissioning stage too. You could do that. So the code for this, pretty simple if you're familiar with the Django ORM and working in the innards of NetBox already. So we just grab our circuit count with the Django query language, and we're checking for status. And if that number is greater than 0, and we're trying to set the status for the site to retired, we fail. And that's it. That's pretty much it. But that's like a handy little thing that you can do besides just saying the field itself is required or must be this or whatever. You can go follow these related paths for all these different objects. So you could use the same kind of logic for devices or prefixes, anything that belongs to a site, because you've got the full power of the Django ORM at your fingertips here to be able to do that kind of stuff. All right, so that's first scenario for circuits. The other scenario was for this next validator is there's an install date field for circuits in NetBox, and that's great. It's not required. You can make it required with the simple validators. But the scenario that I was running into is I had a bunch of circuits. Most of them had install dates, but we also had a bunch that did not have install dates. So if I were to make the install date field required suddenly, if I ever went to go edit one of the circuits that didn't have a date and I didn't know what it was, and for whatever, the records were lost to time for whatever, I'm not going to be able to save that circuit. I don't want to put dummy data in either. So I had this weird case where I wanted to make install date required, except for those unique circumstances. So the idea came up with, I'll start with the code here because I think that'll make it a little easier to wrap your head around, is basically if you're creating a new circuit, install date is required. If a circuit has already been created and it has an install date, you can't remove the install date. The piece that I had to add was if it doesn't already have an install date and it still doesn't, that's fine. We'll just let it pass. So we skip circuits that are planned provisioning. They haven't been installed yet. If in Django language, in Django world, if it has a primary key, which is what the .pk attribute is, that means it's a record in the database already. It's already been committed to the database. So we can check that to see if we're creating a new circuit or editing one. And then I'm cheating a little bit because I'm technically using a private field here for the pre-change snapshot for the changelog record that gets created when you make a modification in NetBox. So I'm checking the install date status there before I actually save. There is another way you can do it that would not rely on private fields. It would do an additional database query, which you may or may not want depending on your environment. So you can check that here. And then, so what that behavior ends up looking like is if I go to the circuit here, so this one's already got an install date. If I try and delete it and save, I should get, you've got to have an install date. But if I were to, let's see, let me go find one that doesn't have an install date. This one doesn't. I can go in here, and this is my favorite circuits. Leaving install date blank still, and hitting save, and it saves just fine. Now, if I were to go back to the other one and want to edit it, or I'm sorry, if I want to create a new one, we'll just put in something here, blah, blah, blah. Going to leave install date blank, and let's see what happens. Got to have a date. So that's it. It was really just kind of complicated just to allow those legacy entries to kind of squeak by the new validation, but it helps you kind of migrate into requiring install dates. And then maybe at some point in the future, those older circuits that you don't have dates for will drop off, and they'll be deleted, and then you could maybe even get rid of this validator in the future, down the line. So that's the first circuit validator. The other ones are around the commit rate and circuit terminations. The use case here was we would have a circuit get created, and then later the speeds would get upgraded, and the engineer might go update the commit rate, but not the port speeds, or they would update the port speeds and not the commit rate. So you would end up in a situation where the commit rate was higher than the port speeds of the terminations, which I don't think is possible. But maybe, and in some cases, the commit rate would be much lower than the port speed, which is allowed, and I'm not affecting that here. But really, it was just the scenario where the commit rate was higher, was out of alignment with the port speed. So that was the idea here. So this doesn't make commit rate required; it's still optional. But if you put one in, it's going to do some checks on the terminations as well. So if you're creating a circuit, you're not going to have terminations right out the gate, so you can put a commit rate in or not. It doesn't matter. But as soon as you go to try to create the terminations, it's going to check those against the commit rate if one is present. And vice versa. If you were to create, not have a commit rate and go add port speeds and then want to go later add a commit rate, it's going to get checked there as well. So the logic here is fairly simple. We're checking if we don't have terminations because it's a new circuit, then we're just going to return. If we have a commit rate, then we're going to go do a query to see what our port speed is and our upstream speed, and if they are out of alignment, then we fail. And this is just Django logic here. This dunder LT is less than operation with integers, so it's really handy. And then kind of the same thing for the port speed and termination speeds. So if I go to the circuits, let's see. So this one's got a commit rate of 100 meg. And we'll go in here and we'll say 10 meg. And you don't even leave the page, and you get your warning, and it tells you the commit rate of the circuit that this is attached to. So very kind of simple, but more complex than you may find built into core for whatever reason. And you can add on these too. So there's all kinds of additional validations you can do. These are both just simple kind of one-to-one related objects that, but you could trace those relations using the Django RM to other objects beyond. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
That is really cool, Tyler.
It's very cool.
How long did that take you to put together?
A couple days, maybe. Like I said, these are kind of simple validators, and I mean, I'm also already familiar with NetBox and the Django RM quite a bit too, so I think that obviously sped things up there. But I mean, as you can see, the code, there's not much code here. So yeah. I mean, even if you were just kind of tinkering and learning this stuff, you could probably figure this out in a few days if you already knew Python. It's all relative. But yeah, they very simple, but added a lot of really, solved a lot of really good use cases for us. So I've been very happy with it so far.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I can't count the number of times where, either it was myself or somebody else on my team forgot, whatever it is, but we have to record that piece of data, contract information, anything like that. So that's a cool approach for circuits.
And just to throw out that these are on the reports repo under the custom validator section. They're the only ones there. So if you want to go tweak them and modify them, go for it.
Awesome. Any questions for Tyler?
So where does that code get installed? Is that something that can be done through the NetBox GUI, or do I need to have access to the host running NetBox?
That's yeah, good question. So those Python code will have to be within the NetBox, the environment that NetBox is installed to. There's a few ways you can install it. You can install it in your configuration.py. I use the dynamic configuration where you define in here what the model is, and then the path to the validator. If you refer to the NetBox documentation, it talks about how, you know, those different options and the different ways that you can reference them. So yeah, you define these, you refer to the content types, and then there's a couple different ways you can, but yes, the code has to live on the same server in the same environment as NetBox itself.
I guess question for you, Jordan. As a NetBox Cloud user, is that a feature that's on the NetBox Cloud roadmap?
Yeah, so today we can help you with that. Tomorrow, not literally tomorrow, but there's going to be a change in the administrative console backend that's going to enable more of those upload types things for reports, scripts, things like that. So yeah, that is coming down the line.
Something else I'll call out real quick as well is, so what Tyler demoed is Python-based logic, right? So very complex logic. I actually have Python classes that are being executed. NetBox does also support, I think he alluded to it really quick toward the beginning, just JSON definitions of very simple rule sets. So if you only have something like, maybe I want to enforce a regular expression to control the formatting of my device names, you can do that solely within the configuration. There's no need to write any Python code. But as Tyler demoed, the really, really interesting stuff comes about when you do drop down to the Python level. You can implement any kind of arbitrary logic, and you can even do things beyond just the validation. For example, maybe you have a problem where you're training your users to do something a certain way, but you find that some people are still, struggling with it. They might need help. They're still trying to do things the older way. You could even go so far as having that validator send an email to you or to someone else saying, hey, this so-and-so user is still trying to do something. You might want to go talk to them, which is my, political way of saying, hey, they're still trying to do something wrong. You got to go, go chase them down.
I didn't realize that you could send an email like that. That's really cool. A number of times I could have used that. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.